All right. So this time, continuing with systems of the body, I'm going to talk about the cardiovascular system, the circulatory system. It's also called cardiovascular, with cardio representing the heart and vascular representing the vessels, blood vessels. So this consists of mostly the heart and the veins and the arteries. It also goes into and involves and connects with everything else in the whole body, because the entire body is dependent on it to get oxygen and nutrients. So the cardiovascular system really involves the entire body, but the specialized tissue that makes it up is the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood itself, which is a type of tissue as well. So in the course of human health in general, this is a really important system, or a really clinically relevant system, because it's so vital to survival. And so a lot of people die from failures of the cardiovascular system, and a lot of people's life is strongly impacted long term by situations involving the cardiovascular system. And minor incidents involving the cardiovascular system, like bleeding, are also things that frequently come up. And of course, we talked some about that in wound care when we were talking about that. So I won't rehash too much of that, but that's also the circulatory system. That's an acute situation with the circulatory system, whereas something like high blood pressure, for example, would be a long-term situation, or could be a long-term situation with the cardiovascular system. And just like any other system, it's very much influenced by all the other systems. So the nutrients in it come from the digestive system, the toxins being taken out of it or taken out of it by the liver, and so forth. It's run by the autonomic nervous system, which is part of your nervous system that doesn't necessarily require any conscious thought. You don't really have to think about your heart beating, nor can most people really just slow it down by thinking about it. Although you might be able to think calm thoughts and indirectly influence it and get it to slow down, for instance. But usually your nerves keep your heart beating at a pretty specific rate. And when your demand for oxygen increases because you're doing something physical, then your heart beats faster to help circulate that oxygen to more places more quickly. And seems that nobody got the Zoom link. I'm sorry about that. I tried to send it, and I don't know whether I didn't manage to send it or whether it just disappeared somehow. But if you don't have a Zoom link, the old one should work. This is the same recurring meeting, so if you join it at any time, you should be able to get on. Let's see. So, yeah. Where was I? So, in general, the heart is kind of generally regarded as the central organ, not actually the geometric center, but the central organ, or the most important part of the cardiovascular system. It's the part that does the most physical movement, the most obvious physical movement. It's saying that it's the most important part is a little bit wrong, because if you have a heart but you don't have an aorta, you'll die just as quickly. But it's the part that makes the blood move around, so it's the most noticeable part. And it's been used, the heart, the pulse is actually used a lot in clinical assessment, telling how someone is feeling by measuring their pulse and measuring their blood pressure. Blood pressure is more of a modern measurement. We haven't always had instruments that could quantify how hard somebody's heart is pounding or how tight their veins were, but you can feel that in a qualitative way by feeling someone's pulse in their wrist. And that is a traditional thing that people have been doing for as long as there's been medicine. So when somebody is excited, obviously their heart will go fast. If they're scared or if they're excited, angry, anything like that. Also, if their heart is not beating strongly, sometimes it will beat more quickly to make up for the fact that it's not strong. And if someone's blood is deficient, sometimes their heart will beat fast because of that. If there's not enough oxygen carrying capacity, in other words, it might beat more quickly. Just a second. Okay. So sorry, I'm trying to field questions from people who didn't get the Zoom. All right, so infection, if somebody has a fever or an infection going on, that might also make their heart beat faster. So lots of different things can make it beat faster. In general, if a better physical shape somebody is in, the less rapidly their heart will have to beat, all other things being equal. So if somebody has a very strong heart because they're physically active, do a lot of cardiovascular exercise, their heartbeat at rest will tend to be slower than it would be in a similar person who was not in as good of cardiovascular health. And that's just because the heart is strong and it can move more fluid around with one beat. And so all of those are things that you can kind of keep in mind when you're feeling someone's pulse or if you're taking somebody's pulse. I usually don't, when somebody comes into the clinic, I'll often feel their pulse. I don't usually time their pulse unless it seems fast. If it seems fast, then sometimes I'll get a stopwatch and time it. Sometimes I just kind of make a subjective impression of, does it seem like it's going fast? Does it seem like it's doing what it needs to be doing? But, measuring it and quantifying that measurement can be a good thing to do, especially as you're starting out. And that then you can look at it later and see if it's gotten better and things like that too. So the heart, just kind of as a general overview of what goes on with the circulatory system, the heart sends blood to the lungs. The blood flows through the lungs and gets filled up with oxygen, comes back from the lungs to the heart and gets sent through the arteries to all parts of the bodies. Arteries branch into smaller and smaller arteries. Eventually they end up in very thread-like passageways called capillaries, and the capillaries connect the arteries to the veins, and then in the veins it comes back. So it's lost its kind of fluid pressure at that point. When it's in the veins, it's not really pulsing. You can't generally feel a pulse in a vein. You can feel it in an artery, and then that pressure dissipates as it moves through the tissue. And then when it's in the veins, it's kind of slowly getting pushed back towards the heart by blood going into the veins, and that process is called venous return. So it's just return by way of the veins of the blood, and that is a part of the circulatory process that is often not so good. if somebody has bad circulation, that's usually what's happening. Even if somebody has something, really tight around their arm, for instance, the pressure in the arteries is going to push it through in most cases. And then there's not going to be enough pressure in the veins for it to get back through the tight areas. So it's not going to, it's going to accumulate and turn purple and, have pins and needles feeling and then numbness and so forth. So a lot of the time, if somebody's circulation is bad because of something else, it'll be a similar situation. There will be blood going away from the heart, but not returning as quickly. And that can lead to darkening of the color of the skin. It can lead to lack of feeling is probably the thing that people notice the most. And or what we sometimes call paresthesia, which means things feeling not normal, like numbness or pins and needles feeling, or sometimes tingling or shooting pain type of feeling. All of that can be from poor venous return, bad circulation in the veins, returning the blood towards the heart. Let's see. Just a second. Okay. So then, the blood flows through the arteries, through the capillaries, through the veins, and then back to the heart. And then it gets sent out again. And you can get a lot more specific than that, but you don't necessarily need to. As an herbalist, you're not really going to be doing surgery on somebody's heart or anything. You're just going to be, you kind of just have to have an overall idea of how it works. And so the most critical thing that the heart is doing as it's beating is taking oxygen to the tissues. And this oxygen is part of that produces energy in the body. So we would call that respiration, or cellular respiration. So this is oxygen going to the mitochondria so that they can make energy from sugar, make energy from glucose. And if that process stops, cells are no longer able to function. And if cells are no longer able to function, organs fail, including the brain. And when that happens, you lose consciousness and then you die. So it's really important that the circulatory system continues at all times to deliver this. But that's not the only thing that it delivers, right? It is also taking around nutrients of all sorts, hormones, messaging. One of the body's ways of messaging is through the bloodstream. So hormones go out into the bloodstream, they affect tissues. It's a similar process to when nerves affect tissues, but as far as it being a communication between one part of the body and another, or back and forth between two parts of the body. But it happens more slowly and in a more sustained way, and it happens by way of the circulatory system instead of the nervous system. So the circulatory system, just like the nervous system, is an information network that your body uses to communicate with itself. And that's, something to keep in mind about it. And then the blood also contains different types of cells. The red cells are mainly there for carrying the oxygen around. And then there are lots of other proteins, cell types, and other substances that are used in the process of fighting off infection. Because when infection gets into your body, it moves by way of the circulatory system too. Movement is happening. And so the circulatory system contains lots of things like antibodies, like white cells, macrophages that eat pathogens, lymphocytes, which interact with pathogens in different ways to break them down and kill them. So, or label them for future recognition. So there's a lot going on in the bloodstream besides just the transportation of oxygen. It's a very in-depth system, very involved. It's involved in every part of the body. Oxygen has to get to every single cell in your body, and generally speaking, it does so through the circulatory system. Even in some animals breathe through their skin or have an exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between their body and their environment by way of the skin. Humans actually be going on, but not enough for it to matter, not enough for it to save you if the cardiovascular system isn't doing it. Not even close. So, there may be a very trivial amount of that happening in the human body, but mostly it's happening through the lungs and the circulatory system. So that has to get to every cell in the body. Even the skin has to have blood coming to it in order to keep it alive. So a lot of the time, if there isn't circulation to somewhere, there'll be the numbness and so forth, and eventually there can be tissue death, which is kind of very dangerous. If that happens, you can get fingers and toes that need to be amputated or something like that due to a lack of circulation, whether it's in the case of frostbite or whether it's from diabetic neuropathy or whatever. That's a circulatory process that's not working, and that's what's leading to damage. Yeah, sorry. Apparently my connection's not that good. I don't quite know why. I'm showing like full bars and 5G on what my phone is saying I have. I hope that people can hear me okay, and that my audio quality is okay for most people. I don't know. If not, I can maybe try and go outside or something like that. All right, let's see. Oh. Yeah, all right, I'm going to try stepping outside and seeing if I sound any better out there. Sorry for the disruption. See how this goes. Well, I'll try coming out here for a little bit. It will eventually get dark, but for the moment, it's all right. Let's see. All right. So this is the outside of my workspace. I don't know if I sound any better or not, but I'll give it a try. So let's see. All right. So there's multiple different types of tissue within the circulatory system. There's the muscle of the heart is one of the main types. And heart muscle is a different kind of muscle than what's found anywhere else in the body. There are basically three types of muscle in your body. There's skeletal muscle, which is just kind of like the regular muscle. And then there's smooth muscle, which is like what lines the digestive tract and what makes the lungs move up and down, which most of your involuntary muscles that are attached to organs. And then there's the heart, which is sort of a tougher, more elastic type of muscle tissue, and the muscle fibers have more branched connections to each other rather than mostly running in straight lines. So it's a little bit of a different setup. And the heart is it's essentially set up like a spiral. And let's see, I have had some pictures in the past that kind of show this, but if you look at a heart from the apex, from the pointy bottom part of the heart, you can see that the muscle tissue is arranged like a vortex. And when it starts forming in an embryo, it's actually just like a loop of blood vessel that sort of twists into a spiral. And then that spiral forms the upper and lower chambers of the heart. And so the whole thing is actually, when it's contracting, it's actually a circular motion, a spiral type motion that moves the blood in a sort of vortex shape through the chambers of the heart. And then the chambers have little valves that are like flaps of tissue that only open one direction to keep the blood from flowing backwards. So that's one type of tissue, is the heart muscle, the cardiac muscle. And then a second type of tissue in the circulatory system is what the arteries are made of. Arteries and veins are made out of connective tissue, but arteries have a lining of they're thicker, and they have smooth muscle type lining around them that helps them to squeeze and push the blood along. And then that's absent in the veins, but the veins also have valves that keep the blood from flowing backwards. And if one of those valves breaks and the blood flows backwards and fills and stretches that section of the vein, that's a varicosity. That's how varicose veins happen. And when they happen in very small ones, they're like the little spider veins. And when they happen in larger ones, they can be kind of large, inflated sections of vein. And that mostly happens on the extremities, because that's where, and mostly the lower extremities, like the lower parts of the legs, because that's where blood is having to flow uphill against the force of gravity, and where it's further from the heart. And so that's the most susceptible place for those types of things to happen. Let's see. So arteries and veins, both made out of connective tissue. Veins also have some smooth muscle around them, and arteries have some smooth muscle around them, and veins have some valves, both of which are there for the purpose of helping the blood to move in the right direction. Let's see. So and then within the blood itself, you have plasma, which is the liquid fraction of the blood. And then you have the cells. The cells collectively are sometimes known as the hematocrit in certain contexts. Hematocrit is like the amount, the volume of blood cells sometimes something that is measured to help estimate people's health. If people don't have enough red blood cells, that's anemia. Anemia is often the result of blood loss, which can be from, in women, it's mostly just from periods, or in women who are the age to be having periods, women and girls that have periods. In anyone other than that. A lot of the time it's from something being amiss in terms of like a GI bleed or something like that, where blood is being lost, or from a deficiency of iron in the diet or inability to utilize it. In people who have been in any kind of long illness, you'll kind of see where people have what's described as anemia of chronic disease, which is not necessarily that they're losing any blood, but just that their body is not able to make and or not able to absorb and utilize iron as easily because they're just depleted. So anemia is basically any time that there's less of that oxygen carrying capacity than there needs to be, which is often goes along with either fewer red blood cells than there need to be or a lower quality of red blood cells than there need to be, which can happen for various different reasons. So yeah, the blood is a tissue that sometimes we need to support nutritionally. And with red cells, the one plant that we've talked about in the past is stinging nettles. They're very rich in iron. They also contain some plant proteins that seem to help with the production of blood cells as well as strengthening of the tissue of the blood vessels. So a lot of the time when people are having bruising that's happening very easy, or maybe coming from incidents that they're not aware of, somebody will have bruises and they don't know how they got them. A lot of the time that's a sign that they have weaker blood vessels than what they should have. And so sometimes something like nettle can help with that. Most green leafy vegetables contain some iron. Some of them contain a very good amount of iron. There's sort of probably a lot of us were taught that red meat is like the most important source of iron, and it's a good source of iron, but it's certainly not the only possible source of iron. And so it's something that maybe gets overemphasized in health and nutrition classes as a source of red meat, when in fact there are lots of other things that also contain iron. Lots of plants contain good amounts of iron.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah.
Does the stinging nettles tincture also, does the iron carry over, or would that just be if you were, using it as a tea, etc.?
No, the tincture will have the iron in it. Yeah. If I were making it specifically for someone for iron, I would probably do it as a tea. But there's definitely going to still be the iron in the tincture. This is a plant that I just happen to be sitting near that's outside. This is purslane. And if you live anywhere near where I do, this is probably freely and widely available right now. It likes to grow in rocky ground, which can include driveways, sidewalks, all kinds of things like that. It's a succulent, so its leaves are thick, smooth. They don't have any hairs on them. They have sort of the same, they're thick and juicy, sort of like aloe would be or something like that. And if you eat it, it's a little bit sour, and not very sour though, just a very slightly bit sour. And it's a very pleasant vegetable. It grows in my garden every year, just kind of on its own. And I pick it and throw it in with the other greens and eat it. I've also pickled it with okra to make this pickled okra relish called chow chow, which doesn't have to. Anyway, it's one of my favorite vegetables. And when I was a homeless teenager, it formed a pretty significant part of my diet during this time of year, from really June up through up through fall. It likes full sun. And it will accumulate iron from the soil or from any growing next to it, which is not necessarily the ideal source for it, but it's a very iron loving plant. And here in parts of Lexington, we have a lot of iron in the soil. We have these red clay ultisols that have soil type that's red mud that has a lot of iron oxide in it. So plants soak that up and make it into a usable form of iron, and then animals who eat those plants can turn it into hemoglobin. So when you're eating red meat, you know, it's the cow got the iron from the plants and the plants got the iron from the soil. And iron can't ever be created or destroyed, really. I mean, at least not by normal conditions that you would find here on planet Earth. So it just kind of changes form. It can rust, and it can turn into various different iron compounds, but the iron's always still in there. And so it's like other minerals, it's geologic in origin. It's actually coming from the ground into the plants, and then from the plants into whatever people or animals that it might end up in. So that's kind of an extended tangent, but I just happened to see the purslane there and wanted to bring that up. So iron is a really important nutrient for the circulatory system. You can get too much iron, which is sort of, it tends to have the effect of constipating people. Plant-based iron usually doesn't do that, but if you're taking iron as a supplement, sometimes it will cause upset stomach or constipation. Let's see. Protein is a really important nutrient for the circulatory system as well, because there's a lot of protein in the circulatory system, and because the heart muscle needs a lot of it needs to replenish itself on an ongoing basis. So, pieces of muscle, fibers of muscle wear out and get replaced within the heart all the time. So that's why it's able to keep going and, keep beating every second for your entire lifetime. You might stop for a few seconds here and there if you have a very severe life-threatening event, but for the most part, it just keeps going. But that requires a lot of energy, and it requires a lot of protein. So protein and energy really important to the circulatory system. Iron's really important. And then in addition to that, electrolytes are really important, because the process, both the tone of the arteries and the strength of the muscle in the heart is going to be directly affected by electrolytes. So probably the most culturally familiar manifestation of that is if somebody gets too much salt, then it their blood pressure. Bad you have to be on a very strict and very unusual diet for that to happen. But if you were to get too little salt, it could also getting a balanced amount of sodium. So potassium is really important too. Most plants, and just like iron, it's an element that's on. You have to mostly get it from things that are from plants, and some plants in some environments are much more rich in it than others. So bananas are, for some reason, a thing that everybody is familiar with containing potassium, probably just because of advertising by the people that grow them or whatever. They do contain a lot of potassium. So do potatoes. Potatoes contain a lot of potassium too. And green leafy vegetables, plants, tend to contain a lot. It's like calcium and magnesium that can have ducting electricity, and some of the herbs that relax the blood vessels and slow down the heart are actually doing so by working on calcium and how the nervous system uses calcium and how calcium affects the conduction of electricity within the body. Magnesium is another one. It's kind of the same story basically as the other one. So all these minerals are really important for all these electrolytes are really important for the proper conducting of the circulatory system. Same. Yeah, so some of you are already familiar with purslane. It's good stuff. It's a real good one to know, good one to teach young people around you because it's pretty recognizable. There is a plant here that looks kind of like it at first glance called spurge, but spurge tastes terrible and it's not succulent. It doesn't have the thick, juicy leaves. And if you put it in your mouth, you immediately know that it's not the right thing. And then you probably won't make the mistake again. It's not deadly or anything like that. It's just too unpleasant to eat. I don't know what would happen if you ate a large quantity of it because nobody does, because it tastes terrible. But it's one of those self-correcting things. But yeah, purslane is a really good one to know. Nettle is a really good one to know too. It grows in a very large section of planet Earth. There are a couple different species. There are actually a couple different genera. Here in Kentucky and here in the eastern United States, we have urtica, which is kind of the classic nettle, stinging nettle. And then we also have Laportea, which is wood nettle. And wood nettle doesn't have as much sting to it, but it's just about interchangeable as far as its nutritive properties go. It's pretty much just a smaller variety of nettle that happens to be a different genus. And here we have Urtica dioica. In Europe and Asia, there are also Urtica urens. So they're all different varieties of nettle. In some cases, different species. In the case of Laportea, a whole different genus. But they're very good plants to know. And like I said, when I was talking about that herb specifically, it's one of the things that you can rely on pretty heavily, and you don't ever have to worry about giving too much of it to somebody, pretty much. And it's something that helps because it's nutritive, helps with a lot of different systems of the body. So a lot of herbalists use it very frequently. There's a famous quote by an herbal teacher, David Winston, who said something to the effect of, "When in doubt, use nettles," meaning that you can just kind of use it for anything. I would say, when in doubt, if at all possible, consult someone else and find out, remove the doubt before acting, if at all possible. But nettles is incredibly versatile, and it's good, very good for the circulatory system. And very often I will use it for people to help with their circulation if circulation is showing up as an issue. Cayenne is another herb that we've talked about that's good for the circulatory system. And you know what it does. It's spicy and it opens up the circulation and it feels warm. So it does the same sort of thing as warmth does, which is to open up the blood vessels. And that effect is actually caused by something I just mentioned, which is that it changes how electricity is conducted in certain nerve cells. There are some nerve cells where calcium begins conducting electricity when the temperature has reached a certain point, and then the body feels that as hotness. And cayenne works, or capsaicin, the substance in cayenne that makes it spicy, works by causing that that calcium channel to open up and start conducting electricity at room temperature or at body temperature, so that it feels hot even though there is no actual physical heat that's causing it to feel that way. So it's an example of how electricity helps to regulate things, and how plants can help us to change what the electricity is doing in the tissue. So, as just sort of a general tonic for the circulatory system in somebody who is having bad circulation and maybe bruising or maybe numbness or anything like that indicated bad circulation, a combination of nettle and cayenne can be really helpful. And in my if I'm combining that, I'm probably going to do about 1/8 cayenne and 7/8 nettle at the most. So, depending on what people tolerate and how spicy your cayenne is, you want to vary that. You want to make it spicy enough that it really feels quite spicy to the person, but not so spicy that they avoid taking it. And so the exact dose that is going to vary depending on the person's tolerance for spiciness and the specific spiciness of the cayenne that you're using. So that's more important than trying to think of a specific dose or a specific proportion. But nettle with enough cayenne added to it to make it really spicy. So where do nettles like to grow? So Laportia, the wood nettle, likes to grow in the wood, and it grows in the shade of trees as the trees are beginning to leaf out. So, or as you start seeing it as the trees are beginning to get their leaves early in the year, and it persists until late fall or so. Stinging nettles proper like to grow in riparian environments, which means alongside streams and rivers. Along the river near where we went the other day in Garrett County, there's lots of nettles. I first learned to identify nettles by walking into a patch of them after I'd swam across the river. And they look kind of indistinct really until you're used to them, but they feel very distinct when they sting you. So yeah, the taller stinging nettles like to grow in sandy ground on the bottomlands alongside rivers and streams. The wood nettles like to grow on slopes in the woods, and the European nettles, they like to grow kind of out in fields, and especially along edges of fields, along walls, ditches, things like that, fence rows. So depending on where you're at and what kind of nettle you're looking for, they'll grow in different places. But yeah, the best nettles around here grow along the river in the sandy soil that gets deposited when the river's in flood. And those ones will get 6-8 feet tall sometimes. And you want to wear gloves while you're picking them because they'll sting you. But once they're dried out, they won't sting you. And some people are a lot more bothered by the sting than others. Some people can pick them and it doesn't sting them very much, and other people it hurts really badly. So you don't really see them in town much. Mostly you have to get out in the country to find them. So as far as specific herbs that I wanted to talk about tonight. There's two of them that I wanted to talk about that are kind of pretty relevant to the circulatory system. And those are motherwort and sumac. So I'm going to talk about motherwort first. Motherwort is a member of the mint family. It is not native here to the United States, but it does escape cultivation and persist for a very long time. It has a square stem, like most other members of the mint family have, and the leaf shape is divided. It's lobed, so the leaves are kind of shaped vaguely like maple leaves, but they have conspicuous veins on them, and they're a little bit hairy. The flowers are white or pink, and they happen in the leaf axils. In other words, sort of the area where the leaf joins the stem. That's where the blooms happen. And then there will also be blooms at the top of the stem. And these blooms have little prickly bits in them. What becomes the seed capsule, or what's around the flower, is actually prickly. So if you're touching that part of the plant, it will actually kind of poke you. But you can pick them. You can harvest them from the same spot a couple times in the same year if you just sort of trim them a couple inches from the ground. It does have a thick woody stem, so think of cutting them rather than picking them. If you try picking them, you're going to rip the whole stand up by the roots, and that's probably more destructive than you want to clear the stand out, because it can be invasive in some areas. What I usually see with motherwort is that once a stand gets established, it will stay in that place for a long time, but you don't usually see like whole big fields of it or anything. You'll see clumps of it in a field, in a place where it likes to grow. The first stand of it that I ever found in Lexington was on the north side of town in an area that used to be part of what was called the Lunatic Asylum and later Eastern State Mental Hospital. And this is a kind of an interesting bit of our local medical history, and kind of an interesting look at what the history of healthcare was like a couple hundred years ago. This was founded almost 200 years ago, and they actually used the same campus, the same buildings and stuff up until, I don't know, maybe 2015, something like that. Not too many years ago. Now they've moved into new modern places, but originally it was a huge tract of land just on the outside of Lexington. It didn't have any medical staff, and it was meant as an asylum for people who couldn't live as part of normal society, as a usual part of society because of mental issues. And the idea was to have a big farm where they grew their own food and fed themselves, and were sort of like their own separate society where the expectations were not the same as they would be for those people trying to integrate into the larger society. And it didn't have, it was only staffed by family members and volunteers and things like that. It didn't have any actual doctors or anything like that. This is in the 1820s. Late 1820s, I think, that they started it. And there weren't really medical treatments for mental illness at the time. Unfortunately, it was, not entirely utopian or any ableist assumptions of would be able to do and how productive people should be able to be. And as it turns out, it's pretty hard to get a lot of mentally ill people to all work together and run a gigantic farm. So eventually, it changed form over the years. But some of the plants that they planted are still growing there. Lots of nut trees, and some things like the mints and motherwort and stuff like that are still growing, which was a very large area. And this stand of motherwort isn't there anymore. It's the area has since been developed where it was growing, but I harvested from it for several years, probably from the early 90s until the early 2010s. So it kind of persisted as long as the habitat was there, even though I don't know when it was actually planted, but possibly a long, long time ago. And so you'll often find it growing in places where it has escaped from cultivation, where people have planted it somewhere nearby, and it's, kind of gotten, the seeds have gotten distributed in some way or another. And they don't tend to go far because it's not like birds eat the berries and stuff. They just kind of fall out and fall on the ground. And maybe they get washed a little way by the water or something like that. Maybe they get caught in the tread of someone's boot and transported a ways like that. So it's often found near human habitations, near gardens and things like that. So motherwort, when it's taken, it's calming, it slows the heart down, it regularizes the heartbeat, and it makes people feel sleepy, and it calms them, makes them less anxious too. So I use it for all of those things, and I use it very often for all of those things. Usually if somebody's having high blood pressure, something calming like that, especially something maybe that they would take in the evening before bed, as it might cause some drowsiness, is usually part of my strategy. If somebody's having an irregular heartbeat and somebody comes to me and I'm listening to their heart and it's not beating the way that it should be in the rhythm that it should be beating, motherwort is going to be the first thing that I reach for. Because it doesn't just slow the heart down, it actually helps to regularize the heartbeat. And it contains a bunch of different substances that help this to happen. And one of the substances, or actually more like a few of the substances that it contains, are in this category of substances called cardiac glycosides. And cardiac glycosides are they're basically steroids that affect the heart and affect the way that the heart beats. So hawthorn has got some similar things. I already said some of the same stuff about hawthorn, but hawthorn is milder than motherwort. And in most people, hawthorn won't really cause drowsiness, and in most people, motherwort will cause drowsiness. And I've often likened them in terms of what's in them and what it's doing to digitalis, which is a famous herb that not that many people really use, but it's a very strong herb for the heart, for slowing the heart down, or making the heart more regular. It can speed it up in the right doses, but it's actually affecting how potassium is handled in the nervous system and how that conducts electricity in the circulatory system. So it's having an effect on the speed and regularity of the heartbeat by altering what the nervous system is doing. And so that's it's a really useful one. Motherwort's a really useful one because it's quite strong. People feel a difference when they take it. Usually somebody's having trouble sleeping, it's a perfectly good herb for that too. If somebody's anxious, it's helpful for that. You do have to be careful because it does cause drowsiness. And so if somebody's trying to get something done and they're anxious, there's a trade-off there. There are some herbs like caraway or out slowing people down without making them drowsy. So sometimes I would use those sorts of things. But motherwort is a really helpful one for anxiety, for sometimes for grief, depending on how it's manifested. It's not the most uplifting herb, but it's calming. So it's very good for a lot of that sort of thing. So the question of when you harvest it, and do you use the whole plant? I don't use the stem because the stem is just really tough and hard, but I use the leaf and the flowers, which you can just kind of, wrap your gloved hand around the stem and run it down the stem and pull off all the flowers and leaves. So you could use the stem too. I mean, if you had like, machinery that was chopping it up or something like that. But for me, it's kind of like, uh, it's tough and it doesn't have a lot of the juices in it or anything. So I just use the leaves and flowers, and I harvest blooming. And like I said, you can harvest from it a couple times a year if you wait until it's in bloom and then you cut it back so it's low to the ground, and then it'll come back again, usually, if it's getting enough sunlight. So, but yeah, you want to harvest it while it's in bloom. And it's bitter. It does, when it's large and mature and in flower, it has some bitterness to it. And the alkaloids that make it bitter are also part of what makes it work. If you make it in a tea and you put that tea in a jar and shake it, you'll actually get suds on the top. And those suds are the cardiac glycosides. Those are that's what's called the foam fraction. So it's like the part of it that is able to be made into a foam is a different type of substance. And that's a good quality motherwort will give you quite a head of suds if you shake it up. So that's, yeah, it's, something that is a good plant to know. And like most of the other plants that I taught about in this course so far, it's pretty versatile and it's pretty safe and it's powerful enough that that people are really going to feel the difference from having taken it. Yeah, so it's as far as its sedative qualities go, I would say that it's stronger than chamomile. It's stronger than hawthorn. There are some other herbs out there that are stronger than it, but it's one of the stronger ones that I would consider to be very uncomplicated. It's not like you have to worry a lot about it making someone feel weird or anything like that. It's just, it calms their system way down for a few hours. It has a self-limiting, basically, the more you take, the less difference it makes how much you took. So if you take 2 cups, you're definitely going to feel a difference between taking 1 cup and 2. But if you were to take 4, I'm not sure how much difference between 3 and 4 you would feel. At a certain point, it's just going to make you want to go to sleep really badly. And then you're going to go to sleep. And then when you wake up, it's going to have worn off. And so it's a good herb for that sort of thing. And, not something you have to worry about doing any real harm with. The person's trying to take it and then drive or something like that. And in that case, it's probably going to be make sure, the person should be used to it or whatever. So it does cause sleepiness. If somebody's depressed, often that sleep will help them to get over the depression better. It's not really an antidepressant the way that some other herbs are, but it is something that is often useful as an additional herb in cases of grief. And like with other herbs in general and members of the mint family specifically, if you are harvesting it, you don't want to harvest it from places where it might be accumulating poisonous substances from the soil, like lead. For instance, mints will suck up lead if there is lead in the soil. And in most places there isn't lead in the soil, but there was a period of time where car exhaust had lead in it and so forth. And some things made out of metal, sometimes steel has a little bit of lead in it. So you don't want to gather it where there's like a lot of traffic or anything like that. And that's true of herbs in general, but it's more true of the mints than it is of some of the other ones. Um, like I said, a lot of the time it is growing around human habitations and stuff, so it will often be around some uh, artifacts of humans having been there, but hopefully not around anything that would be really potentially poisonous. Um, and like I said, watch out for those prickly pieces in the leaf axils, because they can stab you pretty good. And motherwort is another herb that is good to try and take yourself. I think with most of the herbs that I use, I try a little bit of it myself to see what it feels like. Motherwort is something where you can see what it feels like pretty easily. So if you have it in tea form or tincture form or something like that, and you take a bit of it, you'll probably notice the difference, and then that way you'll know when you're giving it to somebody what it's going to feel like to them, or at least you'll have some idea. It's going to feel a little, have some idea of that herb to do that with. It's also has the reputation of being helpful in labor, and that's probably why it's called motherwort. Originally, I thought that it was because people would just like give it to their children. Mothers would give it to their children to put them to sleep or make them calm down. But I think that it's actually because it does have some history of use as for helping contractions to be strong and regular, and less crampy feeling. So yeah, it's a good herb to know about. Second. And the other herb I wanted to talk about is sumac. And so whenever I talk about sumac, a lot of people think, do you mean poison sumac? Because it's a name that they've heard. And I've only seen poison sumac a few times in my life, but staghorn sumac is something that's around all the time. There are a few different kinds of sumac here. Poison sumac mostly grows in swamps. It has white berries. You can go your whole life without running into it. But I say berries, they're not actually berries. They look kind of like berries, but the fruit on them. Staghorn sumac has red fruit, red berry-like fruit. They're kind of like little fuzzy balls, and they're the part that's used medicinally. And mainly, they're very sour. They're pleasantly sour, I think. They taste to me a lot like sour candy. But if you get them at the right time of year, which is in the fall, they'll have bright red sticking small trees or large form stands thing, and the fruits persist on them through the winter. So you can actually go and find the trees in the dead of winter, and the leaves will all be gone, but the fruits will still be there, and you can still harvest them. Although it's best to harvest the fruits as the leaves are starting to fall a little bit earlier. And that's when they're really sour and sweet. When I was younger, we used to make a drink out of this we called pink lemonade, where we just pour hot tea over the sumac fruits and then let it turn sort of pinkish color, and then strain it and refrigerate it. And it makes a nice sweet sour drink. We'd mix sugar with it while it was hot. You don't have to mix sugar with it. It's a little bit sweet on its own, but mostly sour. But it tastes sweet and it tastes sour in kind of the same way that lemons do, a fruity sort of sour. And it would have this nice sort of pinkish color to it. I remember a lot of the time when I was a kid that sometimes maybe we were overcooking it or something, but it was, or letting it steep too long, but it was more of a slightly reddish brown color rather than pink. But then a few years ago, I made some, and it was the first time I'd made it since I was a kid, and it actually did come out a pretty nice pinkish color, like a sort of a pale coral pink, I guess. Anyway, it's a nice summer beverage. And the fruits will store indefinitely. They're not juicy. They're very dry and powdery. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can find a picture of it. Oh, let's see. How do I do this? Share content, photos. So that is staghorn sumac. I hope people can actually see that. That's just a picture I pulled off of Google Images just now. And if you look at the fruits, they're actually fuzzy. And so, yeah, they're fuzzy. They've got like a red velvety feel to them. And the fuzz is actually where all the sourness and all the medicinal properties are. So if you want, you can take the fruits off of the cluster and roll them around, and in a bowl or something like that, and then, or in a strainer that's got small enough holes that the berries themselves won't fall through it, and the dust will, the velvety stuff will come through it, and you can separate that off. And that's kind of a very strong form of sumac. That a similar product to that can also be bought in Middle Eastern grocery stores. It's a different species of sumac than the one that grows here, but it's essentially pretty much the same stuff for all practical purposes. Hang on, I'm going to go back inside because it's gotten dark out. It's dark in here too. Right. All righty then. Back into my cave. Hope that everybody can hear me okay. Doing the best I can with it. How's that?
Good.
Good. All right. Oh, hang on a second. I think somebody just shared some content here. All right. Yeah, so that's so if you make an extract from sumac, you can make it with just water, and that will be stable for a while. Or you can make it as a tincture. If I'm making it as a tincture, I usually make it as a very low alcohol tincture, like 10 or 12% alcohol, and instead of anything stronger, because I feel like alcohol kind of interferes with its workings. But sumac works wonderfully on the kidneys to stimulate them to produce more urine. So it's diuretic, and it basically works by some of the acids from it get into the kidneys, and then the kidneys work to try and flush that acid back out. And in the process of doing so, push a lot of water through the kidneys to flush themselves out. And so that is useful for the circulatory system, because it's actually reducing the volume of fluid that's in the circulatory system, which will relieve pressure. And it is also taking, it's also moving fluid through the kidneys, and the kidneys, as fluid is moving through them, they have a tendency to try and balance out the electrolytes that are in them. They get rid of sodium, or if there's not enough sodium, they get rid of potassium and retain sodium. So they're kind of, people don't really, in Western medicine, don't really think of the kidneys as being part of the circulatory system, but they're actually hugely involved in it. And they're right there on some of the main blood vessels, connected to some of the main blood vessels. And so all that blood has to pass through them, gets processed by them, and they regulate the electrolytes, which in turn regulate a lot of what's going on with the circulatory system. And there's also hormones and things involved too. But the short version of the story, without getting into renin and angiotensin and some other more complicated things that you'll learn about next year if you decide to keep studying with me, without getting into too much depth on it, they regulate the things that control how much tension there is in the blood vessels, and they also regulate the fluid volume of the circulatory system, how much fluid is in them. So if you think of the blood vessels balloon, they're letting some of the air out of that balloon, or some of the water out of that balloon, and decreasing the amount of pressure on the walls just by taking water out of your circulatory system. And having it excreted from your body. So sumac can help with that process. It's also good for the digestion. Sumac is helpful for that. It's often added to food gas inducing. So food, and they're eating sumac with it. The sumac is causing their body to produce more saliva, more of the enzyme amylase, which helps to break down starches into sugars, and longer starches into shorter starches. And in the process of doing that, makes it so that there's less of a chance that this stuff ends up being in the digestive system and getting fermented into gas by the bacteria that are there, which for sometimes that's what you would want to happen, like we talked about when I was talking about the digestive system, but sometimes not. You don't want to get uncomfortably bloated after a large meal or whatever. So it helps with that. I don't have much of it here, but this is some sumac tincture. And you can see it's got like this very, I don't know how you would describe this color. It's very reddish. I always keep it in a clear glass jar instead of an amber glass jar, because it has a strikingly different color from the sort of tea brown color that most tinctures end up having, or that a lot of tinctures end up having. So it's neat to look at. It's pretty. tastes good, and it helps with multiple systems of the body. It's one of my most used plants for the urinary tract. You can use it a lot like you would use cranberry juice, and it's going to work along very similar along very similar lines and along very similar properties to cranberry juice. It's going to have some antioxidants in it. It's going to be a diuretic, and it's going to change the it's going to make the urine less concentrated and therefore less irritating to the inside of the urinary tract. So it's not strongly antibacterial, but it will help to flush out a urinary tract infection. Usually in my practice, I'm using this along with a couple other herbs. My favorite combination for UTIs, in case anyone is wondering, is sumac and deer moss, which is a lichen that is a diuretic and is also antibacterial, and arbutus, trailing arbutus, which is not in the arbutus genus. It's actually Epigea repens, but it's a plant that grows on the ridges around here, and is not a commercial product, but it is something that can be harvested. I use small amounts of it and larger amounts of the other two herbs in a combination, and you get a variety of different antibacterial substances, and then you get the diuretic effect. And that's a really good combination for getting rid of a urinary tract infection, which is a really common thing that people seek out herbal treatment for, because a lot of the time if you try and take antibiotics for them, you end up trading your urinary tract infection for a yeast infection. And that's, you know, more of a lateral move than an improvement, really. It's like trading a problem for a different problem of a similar severity. Of course, that's not what happens to everybody, but it happens to enough people that a lot of people come into this clinic looking for help for urinary tract infections. And of course, because of the nature of urinary tract infections, they're often kind of recurring. Even if you get rid of them, they might come back because certain people are just more prone to them. So sumac is often part of my treatment strategy for that situation. Topically, it's astringent. It can be used to tighten up the pores. It can be used, it could be used on abrasions and other minor injuries as an antiseptic and as something to help them close up. I've got so many other herbs that I use for that purpose that I don't really use it that way. That's you know, something that it could be used for. It's also cool. Working outside in the heat, taking sumac can actually make them sweat a little bit more, which keeps their body a little bit cooler. That's a traditional use of it that I didn't really know from Eastern Kentucky. Like I said, we had this pink lemonade beverage that we made out of it, which we thought of as cooling, but mostly because it was cold. But when I was in Asia, people were using it actually kind of as a warm tea, but using it because of its sweat-inducing properties to try and help not to be too hot. So it's useful for that too, and yeah, and it can be used in cooking for its flavor, for its sour flavor. So all of those things are possible ways of using it, and it's something that's, at least in my part of the world, is very abundant. There's lots of it around. You can harvest a lot of it. It doesn't harm the plant to harvest it. It's just fruit clusters, which would fall off at the end of winter anyway. And it's not a major food item for birds or anything like that. Some of them eat some of it, but it doesn't, it's not like with elderberries where the birds are just waiting for it to get ripe, or sometimes not even waiting for it. So you can go out and find it covered in ice, and then it'll still be there even in the dead of winter when there's not a lot of other food around, because it's not really a food, it's more of a flavor. but it's a good plant to familiarize yourself with if it lives where you live. And you've probably seen it all your life if you live in a place where it grows, and maybe you're familiar with it, or maybe you didn't know what it was. But yeah, it's around, and it likes to grow in areas where woods have been cleared. So often hillsides and fields and things like that. But not in the woods, not in deep woods, because it will get shaded out by taller things, but often in places where there's a break in the woods, it will start growing. So in the case of high blood pressure, sometimes a combination of equal parts motherwort and sumac is a good strategy, or is an example of two herbs that can act out a good strategy. And that strategy is one thing to act as a diuretic and another thing that's calming. So taking a calming herb and taking a diuretic herb together will often result in a bigger reduction in blood pressure than either one of them would by itself. And so that's a good thing for someone who is concerned about their blood pressure. It's also a good thing just kind of as general maintenance for circulatory system, since both of them are having a positive effect on the circulatory system. And the better your blood pressure is, the longer the parts of your circulatory system are likely to last. Hang on just a second. Question from somebody here. Well, I'm discussing, yeah, we will talk about yeast infection treatments later, and we'll talk, after we've gone through the systems of the body, I want to go through some just sort of general types of pathologies that you're likely to see, including fungal infections, viral infections, bacterial infections, that sort of thing. So we will talk about some various different strategies during that part, and then also as we cover individual herbs that would be more relevant to it. So yeah, so that combination of those two things for blood pressure, or two other herbs that have similar properties. You know, there are a lot of diuretic herbs out there. Nettle is an example of one. Corn silk is one that has a long history of use for blood pressure. Cranberry, as I mentioned, is also one. It's a very mild one. So any of those as the diuretic component of that strategy. And for the calming side of the strategy, it could be the motherwort, it could be the hawthorn, could also be chamomile, could also be skullcap, various different calming herbs. So, you know, keep in mind the clinical strategy is to combine stimulating the kidneys with relaxing the circulatory system. And then the way that strategy is played out is going to depend on what herbs you have available to you and what herbs the individual person in front of you might be particularly suited for or particularly receptive to. So, you know, it's good to think not just in terms of this herb for that condition, but think in terms of what structures and functions in the body need supported, and what strategy might we have for, you know, stimulating one thing and calming another thing, for instance, or, you know, what's the strategy as far as how we're interacting with those different systems, and then what herb are we going to use, or what combination of herbs are we going to use to achieve that strategy. So that should generally be the process when you're trying to figure out what herb to give somebody, is not just to think, okay, we use this herb for this condition, but to think, you know, what structures and functions are change do we want to affect in those structures and functions, and what herb can we use to affect that change. I hope that feels like a meaningful distinction. But to me, I think that it's an important one, that it's something that makes a big difference in whether you're using herbal medicine in a holistic and functional way, or whether you're just, memorizing some particular remedies for some things, which that can be useful too. If you make the person feel better, then all's well that ends well. But I think that it will make you a more effective practitioner and a more effective student of plant medicine if you learn to think in terms of strategies for interacting with structures and functions in the body, rather than simply it's not really, it has its own purposes for existing that are completely outside of what we use it for, and it has lots of different effects in the body because it's not just one single substance with one single goal. And that goes for all the plants. Just a second. So this is a picture of motherwort that Gretchen sent, and some of you might have already seen it, but this is, you can see that the leaves that are closer to the top are simpler. The leaves further down on the stem are more lobed. So there are different leaf shapes on the same plant, and it has these pinkish flowers, and you can see the veins are quite conspicuous. They're kind of like deep veins in the leaves, and you can't really see the prickliness of it, but the prickles are in there. So that's it's blooming, so it's a mature plant, but it's pretty early on probably, and it can get a lot taller than that. Hope that is useful to everyone to see that. I very much appreciate you sharing that with us. Yeah, so motherwort, it's bitter, sumac sour, but you can combine the two of them. They don't really interact with each other badly or anything, and it makes a really nice combination for hypertension, high blood pressure, things like that. Good tonic for the circulatory system. And okay, yeah, Christian says that anybody wants to join a message group, just text her your name, and she will send a group text connecting people. And so that's a place where everybody could, if they want to be part of that, share pictures and things like that. So that's something you might be interested in getting involved in. Another way that you can all collaborate with one another. How long do I prefer to give motherwort? Let's see. It depends on what my goal is for giving it. You certainly can give it indefinitely. A lot of the time with motherwort, if somebody is having something like a weird feeling in their heartbeat, like a lot of the time. So what I've seen a lot lately is that people feel like they're having an irregular heartbeat, or like feel like their heart is pounding or racing in certain positions, or when they're getting up, when they're doing certain things, or sometimes just at random, sometimes just when they exert themselves. And it's often hard for me to to get that to happen while they're in the clinic. So I don't always know for sure that it's going to happen, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I can be like, okay, kind of lean forward and let's see if it does it. And if it does, I know that that's something that's going on. But I've been seeing a lot of that in people post-COVID, and in some cases post-vaccination without having had COVID, apparently, that they know of. So something's going on with that. Don't know exactly what, but in that case, when it's something that's sort of just an emergent thing that's come up and we don't really know why, which can happen all the time with people's hearts for all sorts of reasons. A lot of the time I would give someone motherwort for a few weeks. Maybe I would give them a 4-ounce bottle and have them take a teaspoon of the tincture every night for 4 weeks, and then have them come back and say, is it still doing it? And if it's not still doing it at that point, then a lot of the time I'll just stop and see if it comes back or see if it stays gone. And ideally it stays gone. So a lot of the time there's weird stuff like that where I'm just trying to get the heartbeat sort of tuned back up, or, you know, in the right rhythm that it needs to be in, that I would just use it for a short term, maybe as little as a week, maybe 4 weeks. And, you know, sometimes the people will stop taking it and they'll never have the problem again, and that's great. And if that's not what happens, and, you know, somebody's having a persistently irregular heartbeat, or persistently high blood pressure or whatever, I have no qualms about giving it to somebody for long term. I definitely have at least a few people who I could say have been getting it from me for decades, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't like have any sort of added effect or anything like that. Just you know, just kind of alters what's going on a little bit, and it seems like it's fine to use it for that long. But you know, sometimes you don't need to. So I'm always trying to give people I'm always trying to treat people as little as I can, and still do an adequate job of it. You know, I don't want to, I would rather do a little too much than not enough, but I would rather not do too much either. You know, I'll often have people take it for a while and then take a break from it and see if it seems like they still need it. But it is perfectly fine to give it on an ongoing basis, should the occasion arise. All right. And with both motherwort and with sumac, the stuff that makes them do what they do is water soluble. So it doesn't need to be anything other than that. It doesn't need to, you know, it works fine to use it as a tea. It works well to use it as a tincture also, but you don't necessarily have to, especially if somebody's trying to avoid alcohol or anything like that. It's just, you know, it's not the sort of thing like these pine cones here that wouldn't dissolve if it was just water. Not that the pine cones will completely dissolve, but the resin on them will. So yeah, it's a good water soluble herbal remedies. All right, so any question about those herbs? Just a second. Okay, so I wanted to talk about a little bit again about the next herb walk. I'm looking at the weekend of October 8th for that. I'm not sure if anybody has any particular preference as to whether the 8th or the 9th would be better, but I had been leaning towards doing it on the 8th at Heisel Farm Park again, the same place where it was the first time. And if anybody is up for that, I think it will be a good walk. And I was thinking afterwards, if people are interested, we could come back to my house and I could feed people some wild food, feed people a meal made out of wild food. I like to do that once in a while, and haven't done it much in the last few years. So maybe have some venison and chanterelles or something like that. Probably I'll make a few things, but it would be really nice to have everybody in the class over for that who's in the area. If anybody wants to, come here from further away, they'll definitely be welcome to. Yeah, it'd be a good chance for people to see each other and just kind of get a chance to sit around and talk a little bit too. Kind of think that that's a good thing to do. And at that point, we'll be almost halfway through the course. As now, we're just a little more than a third of the way through. So anyway, I think that that's what I'm thinking of right now, and making plans for us to do that, and hope that everybody will be, as many people as possible will be able to come to that. And yeah. Just a second. Yeah, so I will firm up the plans for that, and I'll send out an email to everybody about that. Make sure that as many people as possible get a chance to come to it. And hopefully everybody is at least working some on their plant collection project. And I think, it might be a reasonable time to start thinking about what you want to do for your second project. If you haven't picked something yet, figure out something you can do with the skills that you're learning that would kind of demonstrate your skills a little bit, and maybe be some sort of significant work that might help you going forward in your practice of using plant medicine. Like I said, if it's a compound or a formula or something like that you're working on developing, then I think that you should definitely be plan to try it with multiple different people, make alterations in it as you see necessary, and that sort of thing. Or if it's something else, then just be thinking about what that's going to be. If you want to contact me for suggestions or anything like that, feel free to reach out either by email or by text. And I'm looking forward to seeing what everybody ends up doing with that. And as you're out there in the natural world, notice that probably, depending on where you're at, that certain things are starting to change seasonally. I mentioned this last time too, but nuts are starting to ripen, a few leaves are starting to change color here and there, and different things are coming in and out of bloom. And one thing that you notice right now, if you live in this area, is the goldenrod is starting to bloom. Goldenrod will often create just sort of a vast ocean of yellow in pastures and fallow fields and things like that. A lot of people think that goldenrod is ragweed, or that goldenrod causes hay fever, but it's really just something that has the misfortune to be blooming at the same time as ragweed, which does cause hay fever. Goldenrod is insect pollinated, so its pollen is heavy and sticky so that it will stick to insects. It doesn't blow around in the wind in big clouds. Ragweed is wind pollinated, and its pollen does blow through the air in big clouds, and it relies on being distributed through the wind like particles of dust as part of its reproductive strategy. And those are the pollen grains that are mostly causing people to have hay fever. But because the flowers on ragweed are not trying to attract insects, they're nothing much to look at. They're just little green stalks of, tiny little green flowers that don't really even look like flowers unless you look closely at them. So while that's inconspicuously producing great clouds of pollen, the goldenrod is blooming, and people are like, oh, look what this goldenrod bloomed, and then I got hay fever. It must be from the goldenrod pollen, or if they think that ragweed and goldenrod are the same plant. But that's not the case. So I think that's nice to clear its name a little bit. But yeah, both of them are very common plants. If you have a field with goldenrod in it, there's probably ragweed in that same field. So they're often together, and so one gets blamed for what the other one does, just because it's more noticeable. All right. Well, any questions before we go for the night? All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and thanks to everybody that made contributions this week, and I really appreciate it. And next time, let's see, what are we talking about next time? Next time we're talking about the skin. So that's kind of a system in its own right, skin, hair, and nails. So we'll be talking about things that happen to that system and strategies and herbs that are relevant to it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You all. Right.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.